The year 1918 dawned upon a world weary from war. For 4 long years, the Great War had ravaged Europe, leaving a trail of destruction and despair. Nations were exhausted, their populations depleted, and their economies strained. The spring of 1918 offered a glimmer of hope, a sense that the conflict might finally be nearing its end. Yet, unbeknownst to the world, a new and invisible enemy was lurking on the horizon. The Industrial Revolution had ushered in an era of unprecedented technological advancement, but it had also given rise to overcrowded cities and unsanitary living conditions. Medical science, while making strides, was still in its infancy, ill-equipped to combat the threat of a global pandemic. The world was interconnected as never before, with ships and trains carrying people and goods across continents, unwittingly providing a conduit for the rapid spread of disease. Against this backdrop of global conflict and societal change, the stage was set for a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. The virus, a novel strain of influenza, would exploit the vulnerabilities of a world ravaged by war, spreading like wildfire across the globe. The precise origins of the Spanish flu remain shrouded in mystery. Some researchers point to a military camp in Kansas as the potential epicenter, while others suggest a possible origin in Asia. Regardless of its birthplace, the virus wasted no time in making its presence known, spreading with alarming speed across the globe. By the spring of 1918, reports of a strange new illness began to surface. Soldiers confined to crowded trenches and training camps proved to be particularly vulnerable, becoming unwitting vectors of transmission. Cities, already teeming with people, became breeding grounds for the virus. New York, Paris, London, and Berlin soon found themselves grappling with a rapidly escalating crisis. Within months, the virus had reached every corner of the globe, from the bustling cities of Europe and North America to the remote villages of Africa and Asia. The world, caught off guard by the ferocity of the 1918 influenza pandemic, scrambled to mount a defense. The scientific understanding of viruses was in its infancy, leaving medical professionals ill-equipped to combat the disease. Hospitals, overwhelmed by the sheer number of patients, overflowed with the sick and dying. Doctors and nurses, working tirelessly around the clock, found themselves stretched to their limits. Public health measures, often inconsistent and slow to be implemented, became the first line of defense. Schools, churches, and theaters were shuttered, public gatherings were banned, and citizens were urged to wear masks and practice social distancing. The streets, once bustling with life, took on an eerie silence as fear and uncertainty gripped communities worldwide. Military camps, transformed into hotbeds of infection, saw their ranks decimated by the virus. Troop movements were disrupted, training exercises were curtailed, and morale plummeted. Yet amidst the despair and suffering, there were also stories of remarkable courage and compassion. Ordinary citizens stepped up to care for their neighbors, volunteering in hospitals, distributing food, and comforting the bereaved. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 to 1919 left an indelible mark on the world, its echoes resonating through history. It exposed the vulnerabilities of a globalized world, highlighting the speed and ease with which disease could spread across borders. It underscored the critical importance of public health infrastructure and the need for a coordinated global response to health emergencies. The pandemic also served as a catalyst for advancements in medicine and scientific understanding. The desperate search for a cure and a vaccine laid the groundwork for future breakthroughs in virology, immunology, and epidemiology. The lessons learned from the 1918 pandemic would prove invaluable in confronting subsequent outbreaks. The Spanish flu, though a century past, serves as a stark reminder of the power of infectious diseases and the importance of preparedness. As the Spanish flu tightened its grip, it wasn't just the battlefields that bore the brunt of its devastation. The home front, already grappling with the hardships of war, found itself thrust into a battle of a different kind. Cities, once vibrant hubs of activity, transformed into somber landscapes of fear and uncertainty. The virus, indiscriminate in its reach, tore through families, leaving behind a trail of grief and despair. Schools, churches, and businesses shut their doors, their emptiness a constant reminder of the invisible enemy lurking outside. Hospitals, overwhelmed by the sheer number of sick and dying, became places of both hope and heartbreak. The scarcity of resources, exacerbated by the ongoing war effort, only amplified the challenges. Yet, Amidst the chaos and despair, the human spirit endured. Volunteers, driven by compassion and a sense of duty, stepped forward to care for the sick and comfort the grieving. World War I, already a horrifying spectacle of destruction and death, became infinitely more complex with the arrival of the Spanish flu. The battlefields, already a breeding ground for disease, transformed into landscapes of unimaginable suffering as the virus ripped through the ranks of soldiers. Soldiers, living in cramped and unsanitary conditions, weakened by exhaustion and malnutrition, were easy prey for the disease. Military hospitals, already struggling to cope with the casualties of war, were quickly overwhelmed by the influx of flu victims. The pandemic, already a crisis in its own right, had become a war within a war. Soldiers, already facing the horrors of war, now faced an invisible enemy, one that struck without warning and spared no one. The flu, in its own way, became as much of an adversary as the enemy across the trenches. The Spanish flu did not discriminate between friend and foe, striking down soldiers on both sides of the conflict with equal ferocity. The trenches of the Western Front became breeding grounds for the virus. As soldiers lived in close quarters, their immune systems weakened by exhaustion, malnutrition, and the constant stress of warfare. Military hospitals, already struggling to cope with the casualties of war, were quickly overwhelmed by the influx of flu victims. Doctors and nurses, working tirelessly to save lives, often succumbed to the virus themselves. The pandemic, already a crisis in its own right, had become a war within a war. The impact on morale was devastating. The flu, in its own way, became a decisive factor in the final year of the war, hastening the end of a conflict that had already claimed millions of lives. As the year 1918 drew to a close, so too did the Great War, its bloody curtain finally falling after 4 long years of death and destruction. But the world, weary from war and ravaged by disease, was far from finding peace. The Spanish flu, though waning in some areas, continued its deadly march, leaving a trail of grief and devastation in its wake. The armistice, signed on November 11, 1918, brought an end to the fighting, but it also triggered mass movements of people, as soldiers returned home and refugees sought to rebuild their lives. This mass migration facilitated the spread of the virus, carrying it to new corners of the globe and igniting fresh waves of infection. The world, struggling to recover from the physical and economic devastation of war, now faced the daunting task of rebuilding in the shadow of a pandemic. The Spanish flu, though fading from the headlines, would continue to cast a long shadow over the world for years to come. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 to 1919, one of the deadliest disease outbreaks in human history, left an indelible mark on the world. It exposed the vulnerabilities of a globalized world, highlighting the speed and ease with which disease could spread across borders. It underscored the critical importance of public health infrastructure and the need for a coordinated global response to health emergencies. The pandemic also served as a catalyst for advancements in medicine and scientific understanding. The desperate search for a cure and a vaccine laid the groundwork for future breakthroughs in virology, immunology, and epidemiology. The lessons learned from the 1918 pandemic would prove invaluable in confronting subsequent outbreaks. The Spanish flu, though a century past, serves as a stark reminder of the power of infectious diseases and the importance of preparedness. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 to 1919, despite its devastating impact, served as a harsh but invaluable lesson in pandemic preparedness and response. The world, caught woefully unprepared for the scale and severity of the outbreak, learned the hard way the importance of public health infrastructure, international cooperation, and clear, consistent communication. In the wake of the pandemic, many countries began to invest in public health systems, establishing dedicated agencies and institutions to monitor and respond to disease outbreaks. International collaboration in health surveillance and information sharing increased, with organizations like the World Health Organization playing a crucial role in coordinating global health efforts. The pandemic also underscored the importance of public health measures such as isolation, quarantine, and social distancing in slowing the spread of infectious diseases. These measures, though often controversial and disruptive, proved effective in mitigating the impact of subsequent outbreaks. the lessons learned from the Spanish flu continue to shape pandemic response strategies today. A century has passed since the Spanish flu pandemic swept across the globe, leaving an indelible mark on human history. The world, forever changed by the experience, emerged from the shadow of the pandemic with a newfound appreciation for the importance of public health, the power of scientific inquiry, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The legacy of the Spanish flu is not merely one of death and devastation, but also one of resilience, innovation, and a deepening understanding of the interconnectedness of our world. The pandemic forced humanity to confront its vulnerabilities, to acknowledge the shared threat posed by infectious diseases, and to recognize the need for collective action in the face of global health challenges. The lessons learned from the Spanish flu continue to shape our world today, informing our response to emerging infectious diseases, guiding our investments in public health infrastructure, and reminding us of the importance of international cooperation in an increasingly interconnected world. The COVID-19 pandemic, though caused by a different virus, has served as a stark reminder of the enduring relevance of the lessons learned a century ago. The Spanish flu, though a tragedy of immense proportions, ultimately spurred innovation, fostered collaboration, and strengthened our resolve to create a healthier and more resilient world for generations to come.